ISAC 100 students, we're going to continue with chapter 6. Now, I don't know how you felt about this chapter on learning, but I can tell you one thing. I really enjoyed this chapter. Why? Because it's my business. I'm in the business of learning while teaching. I always tell my students I learned a lot more from them than they can possibly learn from me. What exactly is learning? Well, according to this, learning is central to almost all areas of human existence. The change in behavior resulting from experience. You ever have somebody say, "Didn't you learn your lesson? Why do you keep on repeating the same mistake?" I guess your answer to that is, no, I guess I didn't learn. You always hear older people say, "Man, if I knew what I know now, I would have made a lot less mistakes." But that's how we learn. Not always, but that's how we learn. Here we see an artist with a couple laboratory rats who figured it out like, well, we kind of did the easy thing, now they're giving us a more complicated thing. And that's exactly how some early research was presented. Start off the animals in an easy maze, increase the complexity of it. Here we have Mr. Pavlov going to a job interview and trying to argue that his dog is very talented because he salivates. And of course, if you're familiar with Mr. Pavlov, this makes a lot of sense. And of course, the artist is poking fun. Learning is amazing. Seeing it occur is amazing. One of the compliments I get from students is, "I remember you, I learned this." That's beautiful. Sometimes they don't even remember my name. When I drive through a drive-through and they say, "Hey, Mr. Mendoza," that's close, no cigar, but "I remember you saying, I learned this. I remember the case study." That's beautiful. You took something with you. Hopefully you can use it in the future. Take a look at kids. They're always asking why. Little kids, why this? Why that? Why are they asking why? Because they want to learn. They care. That's why some of you ask questions. You say, "Oh, I'm sorry for asking this question." Don't apologize. That's what I'm here for. I love questions. Here's some kids' answers to simple questions. I think they're adorable. Name the 4 seasons. Seems pretty easy. Answer: salt, pepper, mustard, and vinegar. Adorable, right? How is dew formed? D-E-W, right? Dew formed. The sun shines down on the leaves and makes them perspire. Love it. It's one of my favorites. How can you delay milk from turning sour? Keep it in the cow. True. What happens to a boy when he reaches puberty? Uh-oh. He says goodbye to his boyhood and looks forward to his adultery. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. That's a little bit, yeah, I blame cable for that, right? Let's go back to one of the big 6, specifically behaviorism. We know that behaviorism, starting around the 1920s, focused on the behavior itself, right? This notion of rewards and punishment. And of course, the bad boy of psychology, J.B. Watson, is the father of this school. And I'll get into in a minute why I consider him the bad boy of psychology. We could argue that behaviorism actually started a little bit earlier with this man right here. And you notice this particular image of him. He has a dog with him, right? He has a dog with him. I think you know who he is. His name is Ivan Pavlov. Mr. Pavlov had an interesting life. He was not particularly enthusiastic about his government. He didn't believe in his government and how they handled treating the people of his country. And of course, he was from the old Russia. However, his government loved Ivan Pavlov. They considered him the superstar of science. Superstar of science. Now, Here's an image of Ivan Pavlov, and check out that beard, check out those glasses. Are they even attached to his ears at all? So he is not a psychologist. He's a physiologist. So what the fuck is he doing in our psychology textbook? I'm glad you asked. As you saw from the previous slide, he wins in 1904 the prize, the Nobel Prize for Science, in his research on the relationship of salivation and digestion. What does he use for subjects? Well, he uses dogs, right? He took very good care of his dogs. He named them. He knew that if you don't mistreat animals when you're doing research, they'll shut down on you in a heartbeat. And he discovers something very unusual, right? First, if you have a hungry dog, you don't have to train it to salivate. Not at all. It's an automatic thing. If they see food and they're hungry, salivation, right? But he noticed salivation occurring when he didn't expect it. He's merely walking to the lab. He opens up the lab door and he sees the dog salivating. He hasn't gotten the food. He hasn't gotten the dish. They're already salivating. I wasn't there, despite my advanced age. I wasn't there, but I could picture him pondering. Why are they salivating? Well, Mr. Pavlov wasn't somebody to let things go. That's why they call him Mr. Scientist, right? He was not a practical man. If you borrowed money from him, he would basically forget to ask for it back. He'd forget to go pick up his paycheck. That's why I have direct deposit, right? His government, which loved him, said, look, any scientific material you need, instruments, we'll give it to you. If you need additional food, as a matter of fact, we don't have enough food to feed our own people, but we're going to give you extra rations. Now, knowing how he felt about his government, do you think he accepted those favors? Of course he did. He wasn't a fool, but it didn't change his opinion. So he's facing this issue. Why are the dogs salivating? And of course, you've already made the connection, and so did the dogs, right? Guy footsteps means guy in a white lab coat is going to go rattle my dishes around, fill them up. Voila. Some of you who have pets have seen this. And so he thinks, well, if they're conditioned to the sound of my footsteps or the rattling of a food dish, maybe I can condition them to other things. For example, a tuning fork should never produce salivation unless it's made out of dog bones or meat or something. But if you pair them together enough times, tuning fork, salivation, food, right? Tuning fork, salivation with food, tuning fork, salivation, food. Now you just do the tuning fork without the food, salivation. Some people wake up in the morning hoping for salvation. He was looking for salivation and he got it. Now, what kind of conditioning do we call that? Well, it's easy for me always to remember. I don't mix it up with the other conditioning. It's classical conditioning. Because when I go into a record store, what's that? And I'm looking for this particular CD. What's that? That has a bunch of classics in it. When you ever hear somebody say, oh, you got to listen to the CD, it's full of classics, right? What are they talking about? They're talking about oldies but goodies. Look at this man. Is he not an oldie but a goodie? Yes. And this answers the lifelong question, why was Pavlov's hair so soft? Because he used classical conditioning, right? Student sent that to me. Of course, all the cool stuff comes from my former students, right? So here we see an image of Mr. Pavlov, and there's a couple of Russian officials, probably overseeing, making sure he's doing what he's supposed to do, and one of his dogs and all his assistants. And so he didn't stop right there. He conditioned his dogs to salivate to lights, music boxes, of course, bells. That's the one I'm most familiar with. So classical conditioning is really just a pairing of two things together and getting a response which would normally never occur, right? And some of you have done this classical conditioning with your pets, as I mentioned earlier, right? I've noticed with my own dog, as soon as she sees the dish ball, she gets excited, or as soon as she hears the rattling of the box that contains her food, she gets excited, right? It's just a series of events, and they've been conditioned. Normally, the, before she even saw the food dish, it wouldn't make any difference because she never even saw it before. But now she sees it. Voila, we've got classical conditioning. Now, Pavlos noticed that his dogs, if once they're conditioned to respond to the tuning fork and food and salivation, and they just did tuning fork, eventually the dogs would stop salivating. And he calls that extinction, right? When they start to lose the conditioning. Now, it doesn't mean it's gone forever. He can reintroduce and retrain them. So sometimes you have to recondition, right? Um, your pets or people around you if you want them to do certain things. Right? Now, little known, Pavlov tried his experiment with cats, and here's the artist renditions that the cats, if you own a cat, you know what I'm talking about, did not participate. I just made that part up. He didn't really use cats. So let's review. Who is the father of classical conditioning? Ivan Pavlov. Wrong. I'll tell you why. I was invited to get together with my fellow professors, for a weekend trip to San Francisco. I love San Francisco, right? And in my conversations with my fellow professors, somebody brought up classical conditioning, and they said the person who originated that was a fellow by the name of Edwin B. Twittmeyer, who we see an image of right here. First thing I said was, who's that, right? So I went home after this event and I looked up Edwin B. Twittmeyer, and here is part of his experiment. He got college students, these males here, to sit at a specially designed chair in which a tone would go off and a little tapping hammer would tap on their knee and produce a reflex by the tapping of their knee. So tone, tap, reflex, tone, tap, reflex. Did that a number of times, and then they would just do the tone without the tap of the hammer, and the student's legs went up. Now, let's be honest, what does that sound like to you? Classical conditioning. Well, Edwin B. Twittmeyer published his results, and people looked at it and said, oh, that's interesting. Oh, puts it on the shelf. Now, let me tell you, those books you see behind me, if I don't read them, if I don't share them, they're worthless. They're just collecting dust, right? So every book that I have, almost every book in the psych lab, and every book I have on my shelf right over to my left here, I've read or I'm about to read, right? So, and the ones I don't need anymore, I pass them on to other people. I donate them or just give them outright. So his research was forgotten. Pavlov does his research later, and he's declared the best thing since sliced tortillas. The name of Edwin B. Twittmeyer is forever forgotten. I don't recall his name any at all in any of my studies. So if you have an original ideas, please toot your horn to get your name associated with that concept so you don't become a forgotten person. Who has had dim sum in their life? I'm going to talk about what conditioning has to do with dim sum next time. Now I'm hungry. I'm always hungry.